Hi guys, so I'm going to respond to this video that was requested by you guys in the comment section. So it's We Got a Problem. It's a YouTuber who comments on Brexit, who's a Brexiteer, and let's hear what he has to say.
Guys, welcome to the video. So there's a report out today that experts have been warning the EU that Boris Johnson plans to get nasty in regards to his trade deal.
Okay, so there are a number of things here. Experts. I thought Brexiteers didn't like experts. But anyway, who are these experts? Experts are saying, who? If you said a name, we could look at who this person is. But you're not saying a name, you're just saying experts. So when it's comfortable, you'll say experts. When it's uncomfortable, you'll say, these people are not experts. We shouldn't be listening to experts. And the second thing, the EU are worried. So somebody has said something about the EU. That's as much as we can get. And that they're worried about Boris Johnson. Okay, but Boris Johnson, I'm sorry to bust your bubble here, We Got a Problem. But Boris Johnson doesn't conduct the trade deals. You understand that Boris Johnson doesn't go in and bang his fist on the table and say, I want whatever. It doesn't work like that. He organizes a team. Him and his administration organize a team of experts, and they go and they carry out the trade negotiations with the European Union. And the European Union on the other side have their experts in trade negotiations. And the UK go in with what they would like to achieve, and the EU go in with what they would like to achieve. But unfortunately, it's not an equal partnership. It's not equal parties we have. One is large and the other is much smaller.
As we all know, he has promised and signed into law the fact that the transition period cannot be extended. So like I said before, it is possible that he does go very hardball with the EU, especially in...
Hardball in what way? What can he do? Can you please give an example of what you mean by hardball?
Response to the article I covered before that said the EU plan to go hardball with him, with a political expert warning that the UK is going to play hardball with the EU and that the EU...
A political expert. Who?
Is going to struggle in that because, of course, as we all know, they need a trade deal much more than we do. We are literally propping up the EU financially as it stands. But the Express has a...
But you're mixing two things here. Trade and financial contributions are two different things. Now, see, this is going back to the same weird and pointless argument that was made back in 2016 when it was said... This is not exactly the same thing, but it's quite similar. The car companies like BMW and Mercedes are going to put pressure on Angela Merkel to give the UK a better trade deal because they don't want to lose business. So there'll be this economic pressure within and political pressure within the European Union to get a good trade deal with the UK. But we've seen that hasn't materialized. So this idea that the EU need to have a good trade deal, a trade deal that's beneficial to the UK because the UK prop up the EU. But if the UK are gone, there's no more propping up, in your words. So what difference does it make what type of trade deal the EU would get? You're attempting to say that the EU need a trade deal with the UK because the UK prop up the EU. Yes, but after you leave, there'll be no propping up.
There's an article on it saying EU panic as Boris Johnson to become nasty with Brussels to secure Brexit.
Let me guess, this is the Daily Mail. So
Eurocrats...
So EU panic as Boris Johnson became nasty with Brussels. Panic how? Like, Boris Johnson doesn't even have a trade team organized. He doesn't have a list of names of people who are going to go and do the trade negotiations. Now maybe you and people like you believe Boris Johnson is going to go there himself, without a pen and paper, like David Davis did, and fold. How do you fold without paper? But fold within, 20 minutes to Michel Barnier. Boris Johnson is an idiot regarding these issues. He has demonstrated when he met with the Prime Minister of Luxembourg, he had to be told, how. I don't remember exactly the issue, but it was embarrassing. He had to ask if, I don't remember what it was. It was something to do with Northern Ireland and the border in the Irish Sea, or about trade between the UK and Northern Ireland, or Northern Ireland and the EU. But anyway, he didn't understand what he was talking about. He had to turn to someone and they had to explain it to him. But, once again, Boris Johnson isn't the one doing the trade negotiations. He needs to have a team, and we still haven't heard who these people are. So how can the EU be worried? How can they be panicking if they don't know who the team is?
Have been warned that Brexit trade negotiations could bring out the nasty side of Boris Johnson after the Prime Minister pledged to deliver on an agreement within 12 months.
Once again, but the nasty side of Boris... Do you not know how trade negotiations work, or any type of negotiations? Nasty, even if Boris Johnson is nasty, do you not think that the trade negotiators in the EU have dealt with people like this? They have done trade negotiations with Russia. They have done trade negotiations with the United States, with Japan, with different countries around the world. Do you think they're shaking in their boots? Okay, we've done trade negotiations with the Russians, but wait till Boris Johnson comes. What are we going to do with him?
Which is something we already knew. Then we got this short clip here from France 24, which we'll play, and then I'll carry on reading the article.
And there's this second cliff edge, Richard Verly, which he has set up, because he has said emphatically there has to be a trade deal by the end of 2020 or else.
True. I'm afraid that in 2020, as far as the European Union is concerned, we're going to discover nasty Boris Johnson. Until now, he was either the buffoon or the populist, but he's going to become nasty on the trade issue. It's not going to be easy for the EU to negotiate that trade deal. And to tell the truth, the EU needs a trade deal as much as the UK. We've been told in 2019 with a large part of truth that the UK was in a weaker position because it was the Brexit without an agreement would have been very difficult to hold for the British economy. Now it's a bit different, and with the election in his favour, Boris Johnson can now come forward more fiercely, and I'm afraid that the unity within the 27 might be a bit shaky during the coming month.
But you're using this guy who is a Eurosceptic. So, okay, let's have a Eurosceptic respond to this issue. Of course he's going to say that the European Union are not able to deal with Boris Johnson. But there's no evidence here. It's all feelings. Boris Johnson is going to be angry. Boris Johnson is going to be nasty. But I haven't seen any evidence that Boris Johnson is in a stronger position than the European Union. In what way? All I've heard is hot air, be it from "we got a problem" or this guy here, this French guy. Can I see some evidence that the European Union are in a weaker position than Boris Johnson is? Like Boris Johnson today hasn't done any interviews. He's AWOL. I know this isn't related to this exact video, but Boris Johnson is not such a strong figure that many Brexiteers seem to present him as.
Boris Johnson ruled out extending the Brexit transition period past December 2020 as he expressed his confidence a new commercial agreement with the European Union can be struck by...
Okay, well, I'll let him finish.
December 2020. His commitment sparked political expert Richard Worley to warn Brussels could see the Prime Minister become nasty in order to secure a deal with the bloc within 12 months. Le Temps Paris correspondent told France 24, "I'm afraid that in 2020, as far as the European Union is concerned, we are going to discover a nasty Boris Johnson. And so they should, considering the games they've been playing with us over the last few years. It's about time a British Prime Minister started taking them to task."
In what sense? This is just more bluster. Like the European Union have been treating us badly. How? You've had a veto. The European Union have been wanting to do many things, and the UK has blocked it because of the UK's veto. Maybe this is very convenient to forget about.
Until now, as you heard in the clip, he was the buffoon or the populist, but he is going to become nasty on the trade issue. It isn't going to be easy for the EU to negotiate that deal.
It isn't going to be. But for example, how? This is extremely... Look, I'm doing this response video, but I'm getting extremely frustrated with this video producer. We got a problem. Because he keeps saying things, but he doesn't provide any evidence. He's using a video, an interview from a Eurosceptic, a French Eurosceptic. He's using Daily Mail articles. But I want to see some evidence that the European Union are in a weaker position than Boris Johnson. And this thing about Boris Johnson is going to become nasty. Once again, Boris Johnson is not going to be conducting the trade negotiations. He'll be going on TV saying, yes, we're doing this, yes, we're doing that. But he won't be in the negotiations. The same way that Theresa May didn't conduct the the negotiations with the European Union after Article 50 was triggered. What is? Am I saying something that's not making any sense? Boris Johnson will not be in the trade negotiations.
No, it's not. And if they try to play hardball, Boris Johnson has the majority in Parliament to just go no deal. Right, we'll leave, right.
So Boris Johnson has... Why do you think that the European Union give a crap about Boris Johnson's majority in Parliament? Why would that make any difference to them? It just means the only difference it could make to them is that, okay, now there is a government that isn't going to collapse. That's the only difference. But in regard to the trade negotiation, why would that make any difference? Boris Johnson has a majority in Parliament, then we better give him what he wants. Or he's going to do what? He's going to leave without a deal. Look, I've said this before. Boris Johnson's not going to leave without a deal. He may leave with something that's equivalent to no deal, but he will get something written down, and he'll present it as a deal, and the Brexiteers will be cheering, look, Boris Johnson got a deal. And then the crap will arrive, and then the blame will start. The blame will be, and I've heard it already, people blaming me. I'm a 2-bit YouTuber with 20,000 subscribers. I love all my subscribers, but I'm small fish. People were blaming me for how how the Brexit negotiations are going. Me. Now, maybe this person is just trolling, but James O'Brien has been blamed for the state of Brexit. People who have no impact on it are being blamed for it. So when Boris Johnson comes back with his trade deal, which will be a bare bones trade deal, just a trade deal in name only, it's for his own political benefit. He'll come back, he'll say, look what I have. I defeated the EU. I got a good trade deal. It will be absolute crap. But he'll be able to present it as something great. And people like, we got a problem, will be cheering, yeah, Boris is great, without actually looking at what the trade deal is. And it will be pretty much no deal. And it will be damaging to the UK. But as soon as the damage starts to take place, as soon as people start to feel it, it won't be immediate, it'll be soon after, maybe a year or 2 years after. The blame will be for, it was the Remainers, or it was the EU, or it was Parliament, or it was the judiciary, or it was the Irish, for example, because they're nearby.
Right now, but I don't know whether he'll do that. Something inside me tells me that he probably wouldn't. So I still think he would prefer a trade deal, but he's definitely left the option open to not get a trade deal, so he doesn't end up in a position that makes him look like Maybot. To tell the truth, the EU needs a trade deal as much as the UK. Now, we heard him say that during the clip, and that's not correct. The EU needs a trade deal a hell of a lot more than we do. We've been told in 2019, with a large part of the truth, the UK was in a weaker position because of Brexit without an agreement would have been difficult for the British economy. Now it's a bit different. No, it's not a bit different. It wouldn't have been difficult for the British economy any more than it would be now. The difficulty would have been political difficulty. With a minority government, a no-deal Brexit would have been very hard to sort out because, of course, you would have had Ramonas left and right, as we see before the election, trying their best to stop everything that Boris Johnson is trying to do. Even if it was a good thing, let's be honest, it's Boris derangement syndrome. Anything Boris said is Boris bad.
But this is just like an attempt at strawmanning. You know, any criticism I have had of Boris Johnson regarding Brexit was of his policy. Boris Johnson used to be saying that the European Union was a great entity. Then he was writing newspapers about... No, first of all, he was writing about how bad the European Union was. Then he was singing the European Union's praises back in 2015, before the referendum. And now he's the arch-Brexiter. Do you not understand that Boris Johnson lies to people? If Boris Johnson told you it was raining, you would have to go out and check it yourself. Because Boris Johnson cannot be trusted. I don't trust Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson said he loves Brexit. I don't know whether he loves Brexit or not. Because he's a liar.
Much like Trump in the US with Trump derangement syndrome. So no, it's not that the British economy is different now. The British economy is the same. The difference is, like I've said...
Tell that to the people in who used to work in Nissan. The British economy is the same now. The pound has lost more value, more money has been lost in the value of the pound in the last 3 years in total than the money that was sent to the European Union. So Brexit has done more damage to the economy than the European Union, than the money sent to the European Union since 1973. Think about that for a moment.
Political. With a majority, things get a whole lot easier, especially a no-deal Brexit. The article continues. Mr. Worley also suggested...
Because the European Union don't want to work with a government that's going to collapse. It's nothing to do with a no-deal Brexit or a deal Brexit or how powerful Boris Johnson is or how much he can be nasty. The European Union were happy when Boris Johnson won his majority. Why do you think that's the case? Because they love Boris Johnson? Because they're afraid of him? No, because they want to work with a stable government. They didn't want a hung parliament. Remainers wanted a hung parliament. The European Union didn't want a hung parliament. They wanted a strong government. Because at least when they're dealing with a strong government, they know what they're dealing with. If they're dealing with a hung parliament or a coalition government, there's a risk that someone will say something today and tomorrow there'll be a new politician there saying something different. I don't think this is very difficult to understand. This guy has, I don't know how many thousands of subscribers, so he understands something about politics. This is not exactly rocket science.
EU chief negotiator Michel Barnier could see his attempts to keep the EU 27 united through the second phase of Brexit talks collapse, should member states begin to calculate the benefits of a close trade alliance with the UK. Because as they know, we are the bank balance of the EU. So when we're gone, they know that money's gone.
Can you provide some evidence for that? Do you not understand that there are a lot of financial institutions moving their money out of the UK? Not all of them, but a lot of them are moving their money out to Dublin, for example, to Berlin, or maybe Bonn. I'm not exactly. No, I know it's one of the German cities, to Amsterdam. to Milan. So, if British financial institutions are moving the money out, then they're not exactly confident about the future.
And hopefully member states do realise that their benefits lie outside of the EU and start pushing for an exit themselves.
How? Please give me some examples of how Ireland, for example, would be better off outside the EU. I'd love to hear some examples of that. There is an actual movement to convince Irish people to support leaving the European Union. But they haven't presented anything. They've presented is just pipe dreams and unicorns.
I will back them, of course, as I'm sure most of my viewers would also, because our problem is with the EU, not the European nations.
Please tell me the difference. We're not anti-European, which you really are, because you don't like the European people coming to the UK, because you don't speak out two parts of your mouth here, Guy. These types of people will say, no, we love the European people, we don't like the EU. Why did you vote for Brexit? Because we don't want the European people coming to our country. So you don't like the French people, you don't like the Germans, you don't like the Italians, you don't like the Spanish, you don't like the Irish, you don't like the Dutch, you don't like the Swiss. Sorry, the Swiss are no longer not EU, but you don't like the Swiss anyway. You don't like anyone outside beyond the cliffs of Dover. You don't like the Scots either that much either, but you'll tolerate them for the time being.
European Union maintained a united front through the first 3 years of talks with the British government, but some countries, including Ireland, have expressed concerns the bloc's firm stance could have a serious impact on their national economies. Mr. Worley continued, with the British election in his favour, Boris Johnson can now come forward.
Okay, I'll just stop because I need to comment on that. Yes, the Irish are worried about their economy, because if Brexit takes place, which is looking likely, it's going to deeply impact the Irish economy. But the Irish didn't vote for Brexit. It's going to be forced upon them. So of course they're concerned. Can they not be concerned about the impact Brexit's going to have? Because you're going to have a border, maybe in the Irish Sea or on the island of Ireland. Trade that normally passes from France into the UK is no longer going to go that way. It's going to have to go directly to Ireland. So there are going to be extra costs. They're going to have to put on extra shipping. This is like, you're glossing over this fact as if it's something. See, even Ireland is worried about the EU. No, it's not about the EU. They're worried about Brexit and how Brexit is going to impact the Irish economy. They don't want that. The Irish government don't want Brexit. But they're saying, look, we don't have a choice here. The UK voted for it. The UK Parliament wants it. Our hands are tied here. We want the European Union to stand beside us, and they are doing that. We don't want them to throw us under a bus, which they're not going to do. We don't want the UK to throw us under a bus, which seems to be happening.
Forward more forcefully, and I'm afraid the unity there was in the 27 might be shaky during the coming months, which is something we have heard from Hungary, Poland and Spain, if memory serves, and of course if the reports are to be believed.
See, these countries don't like the EU for different reasons, but there's no benefit for these countries to give the EU a kicking for the UK. For one very simple fact, the UK is leaving. What benefit would there be, for example, for Poland? How would Poland benefit as being a member of the EU, supporting the UK if it's leaving? Look, I've talked about this on my channel before. Imagine you're a member of a tennis club and another member of the tennis club decides to leave. Why would you curse and complain about the tennis club for the benefit of the person who's leaving? That person is leaving. They're gone. They're not going to have any more dealings with the tennis club, or very, very minor dealings. But you're staying in the tennis club. You're going to meet the other members of the tennis club every day. So this idea that Spain or Poland or Hungary are going to, jump to the UK's defence is a pile of crap, because the UK are leaving. There's no benefit for these countries to leave, to stand on the side of the UK. The UK is leaving. There was all this talk about the Hungary or Poland were going to hijack or sabotage the extension period that Boris Johnson was requesting back in October. Does anyone remember that story? How people like this were saying, yes, we're going to get. Brexiteers were saying how Boris Johnson is going to ask Hungary to sabotage it so that the UK won't get an extension. Yeah, we're going to win. We're going to beat the EU, and they didn't do that for the simple fact they wouldn't benefit. How would they benefit from it? There's no advantage to them for them to do that.
At some point, different countries will take the calculator and start to see where are the benefits of having a good trade relationship with the UK.
But they don't trade They don't trade individually. They trade as a bloc. Am I speaking another language here? This is somebody who thinks that Germany and the UK trade individually while Italy and the UK trade individually. It doesn't work like that.
And when you start to calculate, the sense of unity may disappear. I expect it will do.
I expect it will do. It may disappear. You don't have any evidence to support that.
Prime Minister's latest Brexit bill rules out any extension to the transition period beyond the end of 2020, as I've said, and we've all heard many times. Meaning London and Brussels will have just 11 months to broker a free trade agreement.
So, something that just popped into my mind is there is a transition period where the UK follows the same rules as the EU. Okay, until the end of 2020. If the UK follows the rules of the EU, who's in charge there? There's a transition period. Like, the UK is leaving. This is the thing. The Brexiteers keep saying, we are in control. We call the shots. We decide. But as I said before, Boris Johnson said we're leaving on the 31st of October. And you didn't leave on the 31st of October. You asked the EU for an extension. Who is in control if you have to ask somebody for an extension? Who is in control if there is a transition period? Does anyone not see the problem here? This is a message direct to Brexiteers. If there's a transition period, who is in control of that transition period? It seems to be the EU, not the UK. Boris Johnson is saying he can write whatever he wants about we're going to leave at this day. Why can't Boris Johnson leave tomorrow? Why is he waiting until the 31st of October? 31st of January? Why doesn't he ignore the transition period and break ties with the European Union on the 1st of February? Why is there alignment until the end of the year? Do you not see the problem here? The rhetoric...
Which would typically be...
The rhetoric falls apart.
Expected to take several years. That's fine. If they can't do it in 11 months, we'll happily take a no-deal Brexit. If no trade agreement is agreed by the end of the transition period and no extension is agreed, which it can't be now, and fucking rightfully so, the UK may still face an effective no-deal Brexit when the transition ends. Well, bring it on. Let's go.
Bring it on. Let's go. And who suffers if there's a no-deal? Will you suffer? I don't know what you do if this is your full-time job. I don't know if you have a part-time, if this is part-time and you do a full-time job doing something else. Will that job be affected if the UK leaves without a deal? What about the millions of people who are going to be affected by this? You don't give a crap about them. All that's important is leaving. Doesn't matter how it's going to affect the economy. It doesn't matter how it's going to affect people's lives, the society, the union itself. You don't care. You don't give a crap about that. All you care about is leaving, which is, ask a deeper question. What is so important about leaving? Because when we bring up issues about sovereignty, these arguments fall apart. I think people are not going to like what I'm going to say, but I think it comes down to a type of xenophobia. You hate Europeans. You don't want anything to do with them. You want to close the border. It's not about trade. It's not about sovereignty. It's not about money. It's not about independence. This is just cover because you don't like Europeans. You want the empire back. You want to be back in control. And it's quite pathetic, really.
Following the Conservative success on December 12th, Mr Varadkar has been urged to lay out a timetable for an orderly dissolution of the Dáil, Ireland's Parliament. And the rest of the article is just talking shit about the Irish Parliament and an upcoming election, so we won't bother talking about that. But I would say this guy is right. It is possible that Boris Johnson could get nasty with the EU, and I hope he does. I hope he plays really hardball with them, because at the end of the day, it is in their interest to give us a good trade deal.
But I thought you didn't want a trade deal. I thought you wanted to leave without a deal. You seem to... This is something I don't understand about these Brexiteers. One minute they're saying we want to leave without a deal. Then they're saying, yeah, we're going to get a good deal. Which do you want? Do you want a deal or do you not want a deal? Because I think maybe he's also understanding that Boris Johnson is going to get a deal, but he's going to pretend it's a deal when in reality it's pretty much no deal. So Boris Johnson is going to go to the European Union. They're going to say, you have to accept this, and this. And he's going to say, no, I'm not going to accept any of it. Then we'll say, okay, we'll give you a sliver of a deal. And he'll say, okay, I just want something that I can take back to the UK and say I got a deal. And they say, okay, well, we'll give you a deal in name only. Because it doesn't make any difference to us. We're going to go on ahead as we are. And Boris Johnson cares only about Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson doesn't care about Brexiteers. Boris Johnson doesn't care about his party. Boris Johnson doesn't care about the people. He doesn't care about the NHS. He doesn't care about the future of the UK. He just cares about himself. He wants to be the one who won a trade deal. And if the European Union give him a bare bones trade deal, which is basically like no deal, he'll be happy. Because he'll be able to sell it to idiots like this. We got a problem.
Well, this is something we have to remember. I mean, personally, I would be happy if Boris Johnson just said, you know what, we're leaving now with no deal. Stick the transition period up your arse. Let's just get this done and get it over with.
And why doesn't he do that? Doesn't he have the power? You spent this entire video talking about how Boris Johnson has the European Union over a barrel. That Boris Johnson is in control, Boris Johnson, EU panic. So why doesn't he just leave now? Why don't you answer your own question?
Of course he's not going to do that, but that is what I would prefer. Him playing hardball with the EU is the minimum expectation in...
Because he can't. Because he needs a trade deal. See, your entire argument falls apart here. Because you're presenting the idea that the EU are over a barrel and the UK are in control. But who is in charge of this transition period? Who has implemented, who has requested it? The EU said if you want to leave, you can leave, but there is a transition period. There is a rule that you have to follow. If you have to follow the rule, how are you the one in charge?
My opinion. This is how all negotiations should be done. You don't go in there trying to be nice, you're trying to get what you want. It's a dog-eat-dog world.
And it is. I agree 100%. It's a dog-eat-dog world. So do you think that the EU are going to bend to Boris Johnson? As I said before, the EU have done trade negotiations with the likes of Russia. Do you think the Russians are, easy, like bend, at the fall of a hat, or the turn of a, whatever the expression is. They are pretty tough negotiators. Also, the Americans are tough negotiators, but the EU are also tough negotiators. Boris Johnson doesn't even have a team set up yet. But maybe in your eyes, Boris Johnson is going to be the trade negotiator.
But on that note, I will end the video there, guys. It was only supposed to be a short one just to bring you this. Before I go, though, I do want to thank our PayPal.
Okay, and he just goes on and talks about his own channel. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing anything of an improvement here. I've done 3 response videos so far. I think I've done 3. Yes, 2 or 3. And I'm not seeing any great improvement here. The arguments are pretty much the same. Believe in Brexit. Believe in Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson can get a trade deal. Boris Johnson is going to go nasty. But I think I've broken down the video quite well and explained the problem with that argument. Boris Johnson is not in a position. Boris Johnson doesn't care about getting a good trade deal for the UK, because that's not what he needs. He just needs something to return to Parliament, say, I have a trade deal. The Brexiteers will clap. The people on YouTube like this will clap. And then after a few years, you'll see the fruits of Boris Johnson's trade deal. And unfortunately, the media, the politicians and people on YouTube like this guy, We Got a Problem, are going to cheer. And even if the economy starts to collapse, even if, privatization of the NHS takes place, even if the Americans insist on importing crap, that the UK imports crap from them, people like this will be saying, no, this is what we always wanted. We always wanted chlorinated chicken. We always wanted lower environmental standards. We always wanted these things. We always wanted a private health insurance company running our hospitals or whatever. This is what we always wanted. We never wanted anything different. Today they'll say that's not what we want, but given enough time, they'll say yes, that's what we want. So I'll end the video here, guys. This has been much longer than I expected, but I think this is probably the last one I'll do, unless you can find a really good one, and I'll do a response to that also.